I've studied these cases over the years. The first real book I ever read was as a 10-year-old about the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping. That baby died within a half hour of the abduction and buried in a shallow grave on the Lindbergh property. But the kidnapper for the next 18 months acted like he was alive, and they kept trying to get money out of the Lindbergh family, which they did. And that was eventually traced. Bruno Hauptmann was arrested 2 years later or so. But then, and then we have the Sidney Riso kidnapping in Newark, or I should say northern New Jersey. He was the Exxon executive. In 1992, kidnapped by a husband and wife team. He died within a few hours. They had to shoot him to get him in the back of their van from his front door of his house. And he wound up dying of a heart attack and I guess complications to the shooting. But they kept up the ruse that he was still alive. And they sent, ID cards and driver's license to the mail. So, Ray, I know your question was kind of simple and my answer is a little more complex, but it really made no sense. And it just further that what these...
Welcome back to another episode of Code Red. I'm Ray Carr, and with me always is Fitz. Fitz, how are you today, my friend?
I am doing well, my friend. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah, and let's do some updates, I think, for our audience, our faithful audience, and growing every day on the Nancy Guthrie case. You and I both did some other media hits this week, so we owe it to our fans to come together and sort of synthesize what we've been saying there. And Savannah Guthrie released a new statement, I believe, on Instagram. The Sheriff's Department released a statement. Ray, where do you want to start? And I'll pick up from there.
Well, Jim, I think, we should focus less on the contents of the communications and focus more on what the offender's psychology and what the strategy of Savannah's public response was. What do you think about going there, Jim?
Yeah, sure. I have no doubt that the FBI and probably the behavior unit, the BAU, was involved in helping her frame what she said. I'm not saying for any of the statements she's made, they've written a script for her and she's read it. I think it's done in conjunction with one another, even her family, perhaps. And she put these words out, which, were very moving and, seemingly very sincere, as everything she says, very sincere. But just like Ray, you and I have been talking to the offender, or possible offenders, plural, over the last few months, that's what she's trying to do too. I mean, she's asking for the public's help, but she's also going right to the abductor himself and trying to use, certain words like, the world can be a cruel place. I know you've tried to do things the right way. That makes sense in trying to appeal to the emotions, to the humanity within this person. And let's hope it works. And that's just part of it. So, but I'll just leave it with this and turn it over to you. I think also in so many words in that last statement just a few days ago, on the 6-month anniversary of the abduction coming up on August 1st, she's basically saying 2 words. You won. UWON, you won. You've gotten back to me. You've gotten back at me, at my family. I still think it's something personal here, one-sided, that this abductor feels slighted, chagrined, rejected, denied, something on the part of Savannah. And that's what this whole thing's about. Excuse me. Until I see other evidence, that's what I'm leaning towards, because nothing else about this abduction makes sense. So in so many words, she's saying, you won, but please just give us our mother's body back. Right.
Jim, I agree with you. I think the target here was Savannah, not her mother. I think the offender or offenders were attempting to get to Savannah through her mother. But I want to, and just for our audience sake here, I just want to touch briefly on the notes. And the big question here is people continually ask, do you think these notes or these communications, I should say,
Thank you.
are authentic? And one thing that I found in this is that the details about the smartwatch and the broken floodlight strongly suggest that the writer of those notes had firsthand knowledge of the crime scene or information that was not yet public. That doesn't necessarily mean that every statement in the communication was true. However, I found, and I know you would find too, Jim, as we worked hundreds of these cases, not kidnappings, but cases where there's been notes and other things where criminals often mix truthful information with deception to kind of establish their credibility. I think the investigators, the FBI, and local law enforcement, they're going to evaluate these notes or these communications based on forensic linguistics, the timing of them, metadata, the delivery method, how they were actually obtained, and evidence known only by the offender that we really don't know. But I believe that law enforcement and the FBI do know.
Yeah, Ray, I'm teaching a course this week at Hofstra University, and I'm going over some of the cases involving forensic linguistics. And one of the cases was the Daniel Pearl kidnapping of January 2002. Now, to refresh everyone's memory, he was a Wall Street Journal reporter, and this is like 4 to 5 months after 9/11. He's in Pakistan doing his research on different militia groups, Al Qaeda, whatever, and he winds up getting kidnapped. And it was an ideological kidnapping. It wasn't for money. They in an email sent, they made 4 separate demands. The U.S. getting out of certain countries and certain political prisoners being freed, et cetera, et cetera. But with that email were 4 or I think 5 JPEG attachments, all pictures of Daniel Pearl with a gun to his head, handcuffed. They held a newspaper up to show the date. They probably didn't have to do that, but they still did, that it was current. He was still alive on a certain date. And this was sent to about several dozen different media outlets. I'm only bringing this case up because, these people weren't necessarily professional kidnappers for profit, but they know the basic rules of kidnapping is to make sure you can prove the person is alive, within the first few hours, first few days. And that's just why in this Nancy Guthrie case, we had none of that proof positive. I know we got to be careful. It's not just you. I slip sometimes. We say notes. Notes is a connotation like there's a piece of paper left on the dresser in the house with these instructions. That never happened. And any emails or postings of some sort that were sent, they were never on paper. They were digital. It just seems it's so unclear what the abductor, did or has in mind or saw. And that's why I'm not even sure we talk about this watch on the floor and a light being out. I'm just not even sure that's valid. And that holds a whole lot of water. And I understand the press releases early on from the Sheriff's Department, FBI, they're still treating at least 2 of these communications, maybe 1 or 2, as being legitimate. That's fine. They kind of have to say that, and they should say that, and they should investigate them accordingly. But if this was a kidnapping for any kind of profit, the abduction itself was handled fine. It was successful. Again, we can look at the video of the person with the mask and all the gear and the holster in front of his crotch, whatever, and you can criticize that. But hey, it was a success in terms of getting Nancy Guthrie out of there. But boy, if this was for profit or any kind of reward or benefit to the people, this was done so sloppily. And I still can't rule out, and I'm leaning towards all these communications that came in afterwards were by opportunists and not the actual abductor. So, but Savannah herself has no choice but to talk to this abductor. She's not really mentioning the money. She said she did what she had to do. It's not clear what she did, but they're talking to the abductor in that regard and basically saying, you beat us, you won. Please just give us the coordinates or whatever of where our mother's body can be found. That's kind of all they're asking right now for the full closure. And let's hope this person has some level of humanity to them, that somehow, even in a very secretive form, they can get that information to the family.
I want to throw this out. And I have my own thoughts on this too, Jim, but I want to get your thoughts on this. Why do you believe the kidnappers sent a second communication saying that Nancy had already died? Why would they do that?
Well, it doesn't make much sense if you are a kidnapper.
Correct.
And again, I our audience may have heard me say this before. I've studied these cases over the years. The first real book I ever read was as a 10-year-old about the Charles Lindbergh baby kidnapping. That baby died within a half hour of the abduction and buried in a shallow grave on the Lindbergh property. But the kidnapper for the next 18 months acted like he was alive, and they kept trying to get money out of the Lindbergh family, which they did. And that was eventually traced. Bruno Hauptmann was arrested a few, 2 years later or so. But then, and then we have the Sidney Riso kidnapping in Newark, or I should say northern New Jersey. He was the Exxon executive in 1992, kidnapped by a husband and wife team. He died within a few hours. They had to shoot him to get him in the back of their van from his front door of his house. And he wound up dying of a heart attack and I guess complications to the shooting. But they kept up the ruse that he was still alive. And they sent, ID cards and driver's license to the mail. So, Ray, I know your question was kind of simple and my answer is a little more complex, but it really made no sense. And it just further that what these abductors did. Why say she's dead if they're still trying to get money? Act like she's alive. I know you could maybe get money for the body. The family may even be willing to pay that. I get it for closure purposes. But why not try to get the full amount, acting as she's still alive, and just send something from her? You don't even have a picture of her being alive or a video. Just send a lock of her hair or just something that says, you are the one that took this woman. And I just don't have those dots connecting at this point in time in my head, based on my experience of working these cases. And again, there aren't many kidnapping cases like this, but the ones of which I'm familiar over the years is just nothing about this makes sense in terms of a for-profit kidnapping, including saying she's dead.
Jim, I kind of agree. I'm going to add to what you said. And I believe, like you do, that she died shortly after the abduction. I think they felt a little bit of pressure. I think they were trying to distance themselves, at least psychologically. And they wanted to portray it as accidental because there's some verbiage in the statements. And a couple statements they made, they said, we never intended this. It was heart related. We never understood how bad her physical condition was. And they said to the family, there's nothing that you could have done. I just think what that does, that those are classic examples of neutralization on the part of the offender and moral disengagement. These guys are trying to distance themselves so hard from what actually happened, but they're never going to be able to do that. They're never going to be able to do that.
Well, a couple of things. You're saying these guys, we don't know it's more than one.
I know.
And that's okay. I'm not ruling out more than one. I'm just saying we don't know that because we only have one person in the video, of course. And number two is everything you say, I agree with if it's a legitimate communication from the abductor. We don't know that it is. It could still be someone playing some kind of a awful game, or maybe they even feel they're somehow being, altruistic to the family. I don't even know if that's the right word, but somehow generous and saying, well, we're not really the abductors. I'm not, but I'll just put this out there. Look, she's gone and she's deceased. We didn't mean for it to happen. And all the words you just uttered, but that were in at least reportedly in some communication. We don't have our eyes on the actual communication. And I'll put this out right now. We can come back to some other points. I think at the 6-month anniversary, with this case not being any closer, as far as we know, to being resolved, and maybe they're doing DNA things and genealogical, familial stuff. That's all great. But I don't see this being an investigation being hurt by the authorities putting out these letters, these communications that we're referencing here. There's really nothing to lose at the 6-month point. And let's see, like in the Unabomb case, like in the Midwest bomber case I worked in 2002, and in a few other cases over the years, let's see if someone recognizes the writing style in these communications. And law enforcement can cut out like the last line or any code number or something like that, so we'll know how it's not, copycats coming in down the line. But I really would encourage at some point, 6-month opportunity may be the ideal time, but certainly in the near future, releasing one or more of these communications and letting the public look at them and saying, hey, I recognize this unusual spelling, this unusual, syntactic, framing of this particular sentence, and check this guy out. And it may still be imposters, but at least we can get the imposters identified and get them locked up and get them out of the picture, and then focus on what may have really happened in the case.
Jim, you're the linguist here, and I have a great deal of respect for what you've done and what you continue to do. But when I look at some of these phrases that were in these notes that were released, they're extremely unusual to me. We did not fully grasp. She perished, buried in nature. Nothing you could have done. What criminals talk like that? I don't know any criminals, which makes me wonder, and I'm going to throw this to you, is English not their first language, or was something translated for them? You know what I mean? It doesn't sit right with me.
I've been asked that a few times, and I am hesitant to render an opinion based on essentially leaks of snippets of sentences. Any linguist out there knows, and I'd be violating the code of honor if I just rendered an opinion on 3 or 4 words. It was unintended. She died with nature. Should it be she died in nature? And we said this last time, everyone dies in or with nature, no matter how your death occurs. Ultimately, you're in nature. So I am going to be hesitant here. Our friend Jim Clemente, and I know we both respect the heck out of him. He sees female language traits in some of those comments, and I don't necessarily disagree with him. And he's kind of asking me as the linguist among us to be a little more demonstrative or specific. I said, Jim, I just can't do that. I'm not saying it's not female oriented. I even said it could be an effeminate male, or a male who sort of identifies with female communication style. But again, these 3-word or 4-word snippets, it's just not enough to lock in on. And could it be another language? Sure. I tell you what, you put that whole note out, if the authorities do, that whole communication, here I'm slipping, put that whole communication out, an experienced linguist, and I'm one of them, and there are others out there, could look at it and pick up a lot of verbal and written language features that could suggest that. So they very well may have already been doing this. I have no indications. There are no forensic linguists of which I am aware, or at least not practicing forensic linguists currently in the FBI. I know a few on the outside. As far as I know, they haven't been contacted. So maybe they're already working with forensic linguists. And I'm not saying a forensic linguist is going to solve this whole case and blow it wide open. It rarely happens that way. Unabomb, that kind of was the only evidence we had to get the search warrant and make the arrest. But other cases, you always nowadays, ideally fingerprints, surveillance, video, and of course DNA. So, but I hope someone has looked at these communications. But man, put it out to the rest of the world, and let them determine if they recognize this writing style. It's helped solve cases and prevent future killings before. And maybe that's what we need here again too.
Jim, let's take a quick look at Savannah's response publicly and the timing of it. A lot of questions, and I was asked these questions. Do you think it was done in conjunction with the release of the communications? And I can't say yes, I can't say no, but the probability, I think, is up there. And they asked about the wording of her statement, and I said her response appeared to be consistent with the principles used in hostage negotiations. Now, I know in some situations, and we've done a lot of tabletop exercises where both profilers and negotiators were in the same trailer trying to come up with information. Even in the Beltway sniper case, we had negotiators and profilers trying to figure out what the best way was to answer and to dissect some of the statements that actually came through. But I thought she did a nice job in acknowledging the receipt of those communications without escalating tensions. I don't think she escalated anything by making any additional threats. I don't think she challenged the offender. Um, I think she projected that she was trying to be cooperative while preserving the flexibility within the investigation itself by law enforcement. I don't think that the FBI necessarily wrote this statement. I think they had a hand in it. I don't think she would go out on her own and do this without first checking with law enforcement. But a public message in active investigations such as this are always coordinated closely with investigators.
Or they should be.
I agree. I agree.
We don't know if she's a lone operator here at this point, but yeah, some of her language, I think, no doubt, you know, she's a smart woman and trained in communication, but you know, I think she was really trying to pull at the heartstrings of whoever may know something about this, and maybe not even the abductor himself, but perhaps his mother or a good friend, a partner of some sort. But, you know, she used, you know, very carefully worded terms like, this is a nightmare that will not end for the family. They are in agony. They ache for her, meaning her mother, Nancy. Um, and, you know, the world is a cruel and unforgiving place. I mean, that's true. All of us, you know, could acknowledge that. It's almost like she's trying to extend to the abductor, whoever it is, that that person has their own set of problems too. And you have tried to do the right thing. She actually says that 2 times,
Mm-hmm.
and there's always a way home. And I'm just kind of paraphrasing what she said. Of course, her full the context of what she said is out there. So she's trying to touch this person as a human being. She's speaking as a human being, and she's hoping there's some grace, some iota of humanity to this person, and or maybe a person adjacent to him who says, you know what, this is enough, and you know, if nothing else, you know, it's the intersection of, you know, Fifth and Japip, or, you know, out in the field, and here are the coordinates for GPS purposes, and that's where you'll find her. That's, you know, that would be a success right now,
Yeah,
probably, as far as the Savannah Guthrie and her family is concerned, just getting Nancy's remains back. And like the sheriff, I'm not going to completely give up that Nancy is still out there,
I
despite what
agree.
some of these communications say, meaning alive. The odds go, you know, get lesser every day now that we're at the 6 month point. And
Mhm.
sad case all around. She's trying. I have no doubt the FBI and sheriff's department are trying. They're kind of going at each other a little bit and questioning each other. But I'm hoping the worker bees, Ray, are still working together. We know how that is.
Yep.
The agents and then officers and investigators, they almost always get along in these type of cases. Sometimes it's the bosses where the egos kick in and cause problems.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to something you said, and another question I remember I received was why release these communications now and then have a statement by Savannah at the same time. And I think it's important that our audience understand that investigators sometimes will withhold evidence for months before they strategically release it. I I think some of the reasons of why they might release it, or why they may have done what they've done now, Jim, and then you can add to this, is I think they're always looking to generate new leads, new information. I think it's important to keep it at the forefront of the public. And you said earlier that releasing some of these things may key on somebody recognizes the wording in the statements that may tie to someone else. And you know, I think it also applies a little bit of pressure if the offender is still following media coverage, which I'm sure they are. Every time something like this pops up,
They are, yes.
they are correct.
All I would say is, and I don't want people to think I'm contradicting myself here. I'm not sure. I'm not convinced at all that these communications are connected to the actual abduction. Nonetheless, it would be nice to identify who sent these communications, whether they were part of the kidnapping / abduction or not, or they're fraudsters from the very beginning, or even if they think whether they're trying to get money or they think they're doing the right thing by just making the family feel better that, well, she's passed and she's no longer with us and was not intended with nature, all that stuff. So the bottom line is whether these communications are associated with the actual abductor or these are fraudsters, I still think we should take this to the next level, and that is releasing to the public and trying to get eyes on these things in an attempt to determine who wrote them. And there's been cases broke before by exactly that means, and let's hope they're at least considering that, if not at the 6-month anniversary, at some point down the line.
Another, and I'm going through questions that got hit on national media, but they said, what kind of offender would investigators be looking for? And you and I have said this before. We're kind of reiterate. It's not a profile, but it's what we're looking at offender behavior here. And I believe that the offender or offenders had knowledge of Nancy's residence. They also were aware of Savannah's identity and her public profile. This thing was planned in advance, so there's a little bit of organization there. They understood cryptocurrency, at least superficially. I don't think really good understanding.
The abductor,
the abductors,
and the writers may not be the same.
Correct. That is correct. I agree with that. But I think they were comfortable communicating through written messages. That's really most we have to go on. And I think they also tried to rationalize the victim's death rather than celebrate it. So I don't, this is not a profile, but I think it's something that investigators should look at and integrate with other things, forensic evidence they have, digital records, witness information, whatever else they have here, Jim, when you're looking at these things.
Yeah, and I'll say this, whoever wrote these communications, and we're not sure the exact count, and maybe one entity is linked to maybe 2 of them or so, and I think they said maybe 2 are linked, other ones came in separate. To the credit of the people who sent these communications, they've anonymized their whereabouts, because I think by this point that the generating phone or laptop, computer, whatever, would have been identified. So the people who sent these communications, they know how to protect themselves and keep themselves anonymous. I'm not sure the bumbling guy we saw at the door on the video, which, Ray, when you think about it, what are the odds of having this video of a crime, in action? I know we don't see him carrying Mrs. Guthrie out or dragging her out, but what a big break that was. I remember being on one media outlet in real time as we were watching these things. That's amazing. I'm not sure the bumbling guy who still managed successfully to get Mrs. Guthrie out of there and keep her body hidden, her hidden, and not be identified for now 6 months is the same person who's clever enough to hide their computer whereabouts, their IRLs so well. No, you are the host, but the address of their computer so well that the best crypto analysts in the world, not just crypto, but computer analysts in the FBI, they can't find this. They don't even know if it's domestic, as far as we know, international, whatever. So again, the bumbling guy at the door, back and forth, putting flowers up to the camera lens, the holster in front, like I said, and then these people that are writing pretty clever emails or posts of some sort that can't be traced. And there's one guy early on that tried it, like in the first week or 2, wanted money. They tracked him down within hours in California. He was arrested. I think he's still doing, still awaiting trial. But these other people, if they're working together, separate, they have systems in place on their computers that they just cannot be traced. So I'll give them that level of sophistication. The language, if we actually had the language, we could do a lot more with it. We only have snippets from leaks. and we just don't know how accurate it is. So uh, I still bifurcate the abduction and these communications. And until I can link them directly, I'm keeping them separate at this point. But again, Ray, you and I are on the outside. We're not on the
Right.
inside. Those people know more than we do. And either way, they should try to identify who sent these communications, one or more entities. And I think they can't do it through the computer systems, reverse engineering where it came from. Consider putting these communications out there in whole, maybe saving one line or something up top or the bottom that only the investigators and the bad guys know, and see if someone else can identify the writing style.
I agree, Jim. And, I know our audience wants to know, well, what the heck is law enforcement, the FBI doing behind the scenes? And I'm going to tell you that based upon my experience, and Jim, you can add to this, investigators are going to focus on numerous things. One, and I wish they had Jim to be able to do this, is forensic linguistic analysis. They're also going to look at DNA and fingerprints at the scene. Digital tracing that Jim says they haven't been able to trace yet, but I haven't given up all hope on that yet. I'm hoping that there's some way to trace those electronic submissions, but they're going to look at the Bitcoin wallet analysis. There's behavior analysis, there's surveillance analysis, review, victimology, geographical analysis, and they're going to examine anyone who had knowledge of the residents and or the family. They're going to look at those things, Jim. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, but that's what I see anyways.
Not only the sheriff in Peanut County did an interview with, interestingly, a 17-year-old podcaster out of Canada. And the kid asked him some good questions. And basically, I listened to part of it. And apparently this DNA, there are multiple, I forget the exact word, but he made it sound like many, many DNA samples they've attained from the house. And they are in multiple laboratories. And I had that debate in another media outlet, why multiple laboratories, why not one? And I agreed with, I was on with Maureen O'Connell, and, we agreed that different labs across the U.S., including the FBI, have different levels and layers of expertise, of technology, of experience, and techniques. I mean, everything in there. And I think the focus now is just identifying any DNA in there, running it through CODIS, that's the national database for people that have their DNA in there for criminal purposes, and checking out through these public DNA family genealogical websites and trying to get a third or fourth cousin identified. Oh, this matches up DNA wise. This is like a third cousin. They go out and interview those people. Okay, what's your family tree like, going back to their grandparents and seeing who's the wacky person, maybe has a connection to Tucson, Arizona, or used to live there, whatever. And he lives on his own. No one really talks to him, and he always watches the morning NBC News. They may know a little bit about him, and that's the kind of clue they would get, would bring this together. So let's hope that genealogical / familial DNA analysis is where the focus of this is right now. That does take a while. It's one thing developing the DNA from an exemplar on sheetrock or on a sofa. And again, 99% of the DNA found in the Nancy Guthrie home belongs there. It's hers. It's her family. It's workers, caretakers, you name it, that have been invited in there, allowed there. And we can't rule out that one of those caretakers or workers is the one who took her. And that person could say, well, yeah, my DNA is there because I put a new light fixture in, a month before, whatever. So this is where it gets tricky. Then they have to do criminal histories of everyone. Mm-hmm. But I'm hoping they're looking at the emails of Savannah from going back 5 years, mm-hmm. being a celebrity, an attractive woman, smart. She looks right into the camera. One thing with actors, when they get stalked, they're interacting with other people on screen. I learned a long time ago with these stalkers that they fall in love with the weather women and the news anchors because they look right into the camera, and these people get their imaginations and their fantasies going, oh, she's talking to me. You and I don't think that way. The vast majority, no one in our audience does, unless the abductor is listening, which we can't rule that out. But they see this woman looking at them in the camera. I've interviewed these guys. Well, I was convinced she was talking to me.
Yeah.
And I was convinced she was in love with me. And I asked her for a picture, and she sent me, an 8x10 glossy. This is back in the day, signed,
Yep.
which of course they have thousands of them they send out, over the years, these celebrities. I have a feeling that's some sort of a ballpark where we are with this case here. And I'm just hoping that is also part of the focus of this investigation. Every single fan, email, letter, phone call Savannah got going back at least 5 years, and see where it goes from there.
Jim, I'm going to kind of wrap this thing up. I'm going to give you what I think, to me, was the biggest behavioral shift with this new information that came out. And it was a transition from the confidence in the first communication to the justification in the second. We remember the first note, or the first communication, was controlling and transactional. They said, pay or she dies. The second is apologetic and explanatory. They said, we never intended this. The change, to me, reflects a significant change in circumstances. Now, whether the victim died unexpectedly, or the Nancy died unexpectedly, or the offenders panicked, they recognized that the investigation was intensifying. And while I really don't know which explanation is correct, I think the shift in behavior is significant and worth close scrutiny. The other thing is Savannah's Instagram response. I think it's reasonable to say it's consistent with hostage negotiation principles, and that families often coordinated public messaging with investigators during kidnapping cases. Other than that, there's not much else to run on here, although we did cover quite a bit of ground here, Jim.
Yeah, considering there really isn't that much more news in this case, but I felt we owed it to our audience, at the 6-month anniversary, to recapture everything we could here. So I'm glad to do that, and we'll be back on the air within hours if something major breaks in this case, and we'll do everything we can for our Cold Red subscribers to, in fact, help them understand this as best we can. Mm-hmm. As a reminder, there's very few of these types of cases in our country's history, and I don't think anyone maybe working in law enforcement today has ever worked this kind of abduction. If it is a kidnapping, they're the rarest of the rare, but certainly an abduction such as this. So it's a lot of people, in brand new territory out there, uncharted lands, working this investigation, and let's just hope they're getting it right.
I agree, Jim.
All right, why don't we take off from there? I want to thank everyone for listening to this episode of Cold Red. We're going to continue this conversation on our Cold Red podcast Reddit page. So let us know your thoughts. Plus Patreon channel for exclusive case breakdowns. So please subscribe to Cold Red Podcast mailing list and follow us on all Cold Red Podcast social media platforms, and check out our blog at coldredpodcast.com. We'll be back next week with another episode of Cold Red. Until then, stay safe. Be aware of your surroundings. It may save your life. Thanks again to our producers, Matt Robinson, Matt McLaughlin, our music coordinator, Rick Schilling. Thanks, as always, Ray, to you. I'm Jim Fitz, signing out. And everyone, we will see you next time on Cold Red.